Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, The Big Bad Five, Metabolic Syndrome. I'm Holly Reed, Head of Community Engagement at Heart of Wellness. Heart of Wellness is an interdisciplinary clinic located in Tumwater, Washington. We have 6 naturopathic physicians and a variety of specialty clinicians, including acupuncture, functional medicine, massage therapy, physical therapy, and of course, nutrition. We are proud to welcome Laura Woodworth, our fantastic registered dietitian nutritionist, to share her knowledge with you today. Following the presentation, time permitting, Laura will answer a few questions. She can't go into any terrible specifics, but she will answer your questions to the best of her ability after, if there is time. So without further ado, thank you, Laura, for joining us.
It is my pleasure. I'm going to switch over to the presentation screen and then go from there. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, I hate it when you can't see the button. There we go. Okay. So can everybody see the presentation on their screen now? Just give me a thumbs up. Does everybody know how to use those little bubble emoji things at the bottom of your screen? I would love it. Yes, thank you. I would love to see if there's something I say that you love, if you put a little heart up, or if you think it's cool, or I can move on, or whatever. You can communicate with me that way. It's really nice. It's different doing a webinar presentation instead of in person. It's hard to feel connected to the audience, and so anything we can do to improve that is very helpful for me. So as Holly so graciously introduced me, I'll do some more. I am a registered dietitian. I got my master's at Bastyr University, which you may know as a naturopath college, but they also, surprise, now have a track in dietitian training. So it's not just nutritionist training, it's actually registered dietitian training. So it's nationally certified. You have to go through and get your master's degree and then do a 9-month-long internship. So I definitely earned my keep getting that. I love working at Heart of Wellness with this group of fabulous, varied practitioners. We have the greatest conversations, and it's nice to have the resource of my colleagues available. When I'm not working, I spend my free time gardening, hiking, skiing, and going out to breakfast with friends. I also go for a lot of walks in our parks around here. I try to get 14,000 steps a day. I don't always make it, but that's my goal. I'm the mother of a 15-year-old transgender son, and I enjoy having convoluted and hilarious conversations with him often. I've lived in Olympia on and off since 1998, and I did go to Evergreen originally. I got one of those weird mixed degrees, and I focused on hand-drawn animation. So I got somehow from there to here. And I turned 50 this year also, which is something I think is amazing, and it's really been a movement forward for me. So let's get on to the actual subject, the Big Bad Five, metabolic syndrome, and we'll start with kind of the big picture. So a long time ago, clinicians started noticing certain metabolic patterns in people with chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, and other ones also. This collection of seemingly unrelated biochemical measurements were consistently found in people who hadn't yet been diagnosed with these chronic diseases, but who would later be diagnosed with them. This proved to be a good way to predict if a person was more likely to develop these diseases. And so metabolic syndrome was coined. The term was coined in the 70s to encompass this group of measurable indicators that can determine if someone is at a higher risk of having certain chronic diseases. These indicators are almost exclusively detected by clinicians' tests or labs, and there's a lot more than just 5, but these are the 5 that have been settled on to be like the easiest to qualify and quantify in our current setting. So that's what metabolic syndrome is, and you can see the indicators here. We'll go through them, but before I go any further, I wanted to put it out there I'm going to switch subjects and then I'll go back. I wanted to put it out there that I recognize that our idea of gender identity is shifting under our feet in this culture right now. And of course, I have a transgender son, so it's even more in my headlights. But I'm going to try my best during this presentation to use gender inclusive language. And because I believe it's important to respect other people's identities, whether it makes me uncomfortable to try to understand or not, because sometimes it can be really difficult to get it right. But I think it's important to just try. So I'm going to do that. We all want to be seen for who we truly are, I believe. So moving forward with the presentation, we'll start with we'll go through each of the markers. The first one we're going to talk about is elevated blood pressure. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I think we all know what it is, but the threshold for metabolic syndrome is 130/85 and or higher, or if you're taking blood pressure medications, that's another pretty clear indicator that you qualify. And of course, it's not just a one-time measurement. It would mean like having this measurement repeatedly and having your doctor say, oh, you have high blood pressure. So that's that one. The next one is the high triglyceride lipid panel blood test. And you probably know that triglycerides and HDL are part of the larger lipid panel that you get when your doctor has you do your yearly lipid panel. The triglycerides are a type of fat in the blood that your body makes from extra calories. That's a very large simplification, but that's basically the truth. So high levels of triglycerides can increase your risk of heart disease. Our threshold for metabolic syndrome is when your triglycerides are equal to or greater than 150. Then we go on to the HDL cholesterol. And with this cholesterol, the high density lipoprotein cholesterol, they call it the good cholesterol because it helps remove other forms of cholesterol from your bloodstream. It's kind of like the sweeper cholesterol. Higher levels of HDL are associated with a lower risk of heart disease. And so in this case, we're looking for numbers that are higher than the threshold. And so with male-bodied individuals, the threshold is if your HDL levels are below 40, then you qualify. And if you're a female-bodied person, then it's 50. And then the elevated waist circumference is another one of the 5. So subcutaneous, there's 2 kinds of fat, and you may know this, but I'll explain it. There's 2 types of fat: subcutaneous fat, which is just subcutaneous under the skin. It's the layer there. And then there's visceral fat, which is the kind that tends to collect around our bellies. The subcutaneous fat produces a higher proportion of beneficial molecules, and the visceral fat, they've found, produces a higher proportion of molecules with potentially harmful health effects. So the visceral fat makes more of the proteins called cytokines, which can trigger low-level inflammation, which is a risk factor for heart disease and other chronic conditions. The threshold for male-bodied people is equal to or greater than 40 inches around the waist. So that would just be like right here, you know where the waist is, but trying to be more present in my body. So there it is. And then for female-bodied individuals, it's 35 inches. And this is difficult because as women get older, we find that we just tend to store more fat around our middles. It's a difficult situation for many of us. And then the next indicator is the high blood glucose. This one, what happens is as our fasting blood glucose rises, the average fasting blood glucose rises, it's telling us that our bodies are either not producing enough insulin, so our cells aren't taking in all of the glucose that's available in the bloodstream, or that our cells are becoming insulin resistant. So we might be releasing a lot of insulin, but it's not, the signal's not getting through to the blood cells, and so the sugar stays in there. Our threshold for this is equal to or greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter of a pretty consistently fasting blood glucose.
Laura,
Yep.
Does metabolic syndrome impact some people more than others? Are there more people more likely to have it?
Well, thanks for asking, Holly. Thank you so much. So the next slide is about who is more likely to, just a second, I'm going to admit someone. Who is more likely to have this? It tends to be people with a family history of type 2 diabetes, people with a higher BMI. And the BMI is a measure of body fat compared with height and weight. It's a very general measurement that's not really helpful for individuals sometimes. And so some people might have a denser muscle mass, and then they might qualify as overweight, but really they have just a higher muscle mass or bigger bones. But I just wanted to put that out there. Other people who are more likely to have it are people of color, and specifically women of African and Hispanic descent. And then as we age, we're more likely to have metabolic syndrome. And then the other one, the last but not least at all, are choices that we make with our lifestyle. So if we're leading a sedentary lifestyle, we're living with chronic stress, and not all of us can change or help that, the amount of stress in our outside world, but there are ways that we can take the stress in and kind of process it differently. So there's some hope there for people who feel like they can't do anything about their situation. At least there's things you can do about how you perceive your situation. And then people who smoke and people who use alcohol excessively or like regularly, more than 2 drinks 5 days a week, I would say. All those different types of people are at higher risk. So what, you might ask? So what if I'm at a higher risk? Well, being diagnosed with metabolic syndrome puts you at a higher risk for these diseases that I've listed here. And what is the root of this? And that's one of the things at the Heart of Wellness that all of us want to really get to, is what is at the root of this and how can we address the root? So when we look at these diseases, what we see is that the common root is chronic inflammation. And when I say chronic inflammation, that leads to the question, well, what's the difference between acute and chronic? And the difference is that, pause for a second here. So the difference, acute inflammation refers to your body's response to sudden damage, such as like cutting your finger. To heal the cut, your body activates a highly coordinated network of many cell types to address the injury. When the cut has begun to heal, the inflammation response slows down and then stops. But with chronic inflammation, on the other hand, it's slower to develop, and it may progress over time, and it may have any number of warning signs, many of which are indicators of metabolic syndrome. The very best way to address chronic inflammation is through diet and lifestyle. And I just want to pause here and see if anybody has any, let me read my actual thing because it's better. If you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear what you find particularly interesting so far. So many people struggle with making their own health a priority. The question I would ask you is, where can you find some space in your day to take care of yourself? And what will you do? What are some small changes that you can imagine making right now in your daily routine that would help make a difference in your body? And I encourage you to share. I'm going to pause for a minute, or maybe just chat with Holly and see if Holly has any ideas. And then if anybody wants to put comments in, I would love to hear.
Yeah, so you can feel free to unmute yourself if you want to share out loud, or you can share it in the chat. What I would say that I do is I take time in the mornings. I'm a really morning person. So when I wake up in the mornings, I find time to move. Even just a little bit in the mornings every day. If the day looks nice like it did this morning, I took a really beautiful walk. But sometimes that means just working out on the elliptical when it's a little gray or outside than I prefer. Maya says that she's been learning how to make better food choices, and she's finding that helpful for her.
That is Excellent. And I love, Holly, the way that you have like a couple of options. So when it's raining, you have your elliptical.
Yeah.
And do you have the TV in front of your elliptical, or is
No,
it?
I put on some music, specific tunes that get me moving, and that's just, it's the way to start the day.
I love that. If you can make it fun, it's just so much easier to do it consistently. But when you're like, oh, I have to go on the elliptical for 10 minutes.
That's why I have a backup, because
Yeah.
the backup really helps. Because if I'm making sure that, okay, well, I don't want to be on that elliptical, it just seems like too much of a drudge. But if
Mhm.
I know, hey, if I walked around my neighborhood for a half hour, then I got something done today. And that's the best way to start the day for me.
That's great. And it clears your head too.
does.
It's just so good.
Maya says that 2 little dogs that are out for daily walks in the woods. Yeah. And it's those
Pretty
little
nice.
steps, like, you know, not everybody's able to use an elliptical, or walking is sometimes a thing. But finding something that fits your body and that can work for you, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that can bring you a little joy too, like the dogs. Using the dogs to your advantage, allowing the dogs to lead you outside is really cool.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, Maya. Did anyone else feel comfortable sharing? That's okay if you don't. We'll let Laura continue.
Okay, I'm going to go into how we battle metabolic syndrome. So now that I've told you exactly what the big bad 5 are, let's take a look at how we can address them. As a team here at the Heart of Wellness, we look at the whole person and we see how we can address chronic inflammation with supplements, exercise recommendations, sleep improvement, teaching stress reduction techniques, supplementing where we find likely deficits. I already said that, supplementation. And just as importantly, incorporating more anti-inflammatory foods and lifestyle tweaks and shifts like we were just talking about. I almost always recommend a vitamin D supplement since we just don't have enough direct sun on our skin here in Washington State. My colleagues have a collective knowledge base that constantly amazes me about human biochemistry and how to supplement with herbs and micronutrients to help get people back into balance. Stress in our bodies can be very damaging over time. Did you know that when you're feeling stressed, your body releases stress hormones, the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline? This gives you an energy boost for a fight or flight response, but the hormones actually make it harder for insulin to work properly. So it helps your cells ignore the insulin, basically insulin resistance. Especially when the stress, oh wait, I missed one, which is one contributing factor to insulin resistance, especially when the stress becomes chronic. So part of the anti-inflammatory lifestyle tweaks we talk about, besides just the food, are small, simple things like taking a minute to take deep slow breaths, or having a relaxing bath at the end of the day to shift our body back out of a chronic stress pattern. Because our body just gets used to being a certain way. And after a while, we just keep going like that. We don't really realize we're even stressed anymore. So if we find ways to consciously de-stress, it can make a huge difference. And of course, because I'm a dietitian, when you and I meet, we look at your situation and we consider your level of chronic stress. But we do talk about food. And the way we do it is by looking at your daily life and your schedule, your labs, and more. We look at where we can add on or bypass behaviors to encourage behavior change in a positive way. And then we address these imbalances through these examples I have on the screen. We might play around with your meal timing. We might add in some intermittent fasting if that's something that suits you. We might look at your macronutrient balance. So like your carbs, your fats, and your proteins, and what percentage of your diet they actually make up. We might enter all your food into a program and take a look at that. Sometimes even just that can be enough to nudge you into really helpful behavior changes. And then we might talk about how important it is to get more vegetables in and more colorful vegetables in. We might talk about which vegetables have what antioxidants and how they help you fight stress and reduce inflammation. And that can be inspiring and help you want to eat more. We might look at recipes or meal planning apps or a variety of things to do that. And then we might talk about your gut microbiome and look at some of the indicators depending on how your digestion is, and look at what might help you with that. Like if you were constipated or if you were having heartburn or bloating, we might look at those things and figure out why you were having those issues. And then we also just want to keep looking at ways to have more antioxidants and healthy fats in our diet. So like omega-3 fatty acids might be a good thing to add in if you're not having fish regularly, or some flax meal if you're vegetarian or vegan. There's different ways to get those healthy fats in your body. And of course, the basics, hydration, and then just a whole foods approach. That's where we're coming from here at the Heart of Wellness, and as a dietitian in this context. So I like to remind my patients that we are very complex beings with a lot of habits that have been with us since childhood. It's important to remember that we have reasons for doing the things we do. And so we need to be gentle and patient with ourselves when making changes in our daily habits. Remember, metabolic syndrome is not a disease. It's just a handful of indicators that are basically a nudge. If you have been diagnosed with this condition, think of it as a wake-up call. It's time to get serious about improving your health. Making simple changes now can prevent serious illness in the future. This may be your opportunity to add healthy years to your life. As you move forward and begin doing this work with me, we will be able to tell you are making progress in a lot of different ways. We can look at your lab values and compare to the past. And some of the labs that indicate inflammation are your fibrin, your C-reactive protein, and your IL-6. Those all can indicate inflammation or a lack thereof. We can check your triglycerides, your HDL levels. We can monitor your blood pressure. We can check your blood glucose regularly, or I can teach you how. And then you can check your weight, but not too often. We don't want to get too wrapped up in the weight. I feel like that's one of the last things that we should address directly, because so many of these other things are going to help you get to or be at a healthy weight. And I don't want to focus on that number. And then but in some ways, the most important way that we can tell if you're making progress at decreasing your body's chronic inflammation is to just notice how you're feeling. Do you have more energy than you did before? Are you sleeping better? Is it easier to fall asleep? Is it easier to stay asleep? When you wake up in the morning, are you popping out of bed a little more than maybe you were before? Is your skin clearing up? Is your thinking less cloudy and your mood more consistent than it was? Get in tune with how you're feeling, and it will be your very best indicator. And it will show you that the work you're doing is getting you somewhere. And to wrap this up, I'd like to invite you to put any questions in the chat or just unmute, because there's so few of us here. I would love to hear any questions or thoughts you had about anything I covered. And if there aren't any questions, then I'll say more.
So Laura, DJ did have a question about the correlation of metabolic syndrome and the incidence of adverse childhood experiences. Is there research out there that you know of that indicates that there might be an increase in or no increase in those circumstances?
DJ, I don't have specific research at my fingertips, but I do believe that those are very connected. Adverse childhood events and trauma and stress in your childhood, I think it sets a pattern. So you are more likely to have metabolic syndrome. And it's hard, I think, when your body is living kind of under a stress blanket from the beginning. It's pretty hard to change those habits. So it's really important for somebody who comes from that kind of a background to really get conscious and connected with their bodies, and whatever kind of help it takes to get there. Maybe doing somatic work with a practitioner, or meditating, or a lot of different ways. Trying to find the way that works for you, I think, is really important. help you just on your way to healing, and also to reduce your inflammation. It's a really good question and really important to bring up. I appreciate it.
And does anyone have any other questions? Well, if you do have questions, of course, Laura would love to see you in person. If you're not sure if you and Laura will be a good match, we can always set you up for a free 15-minute visit. You can shoot us an email. You can give us a call. You can go online to our website, heartofwellness.org, and you'll find more information there. Following this presentation, we will send out a link through email so you can view it again if you missed something or if you want to share it with someone. And this is the first in a series. Laura will be holding another webinar in the end of July, going a little bit deeper into chronic inflammation, I believe. And we'd really love to see you there. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having you. Thank you, Laura. It was a wonderful presentation and you gave us a lot of really important information.
Thank you for your support, Holly. And thank you, Maya.
And thank
for
you
coming
all
and
for
all
joining
of you.
us. Yeah.
Bye,
Bye.
Tim. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. I hope you have a great day and I hope I can see all of you.
Take care.
Great to see you guys.
You too. I miss you.
Thank you. I do too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.